Greetings. So last Sunday on the Roman Catholic calendar was the Feast of the Most Holy Trinity. And on that Sunday, for that feast, the Pope's Arabic language Twitter account sent out this tweet, the first four words of which read, Yad'una Ida Thaloth al-Aqdas. The Feast of the Most Holy Trinity invites us. And then it goes on to say what it invites us to do, which is to allow God's beauty to enchant us or fascinate us, etc. I wanted to share that for a few different reasons, mainly because it's inspired me to make this short video about the Trinity, but for a shorter reason, I thought some viewers might find interesting that, they may be familiar with the word Eid being used for the two major Muslim feasts, but it's also used for Christian feasts as well in Arabic. And so here we have the feast, Eid, of the Most Holy Trinity, Athaluth al-Aqdas. And so with that in mind, I'd like to say Eid Mubarak to all the Trinitarians out there. I know it's a bit belated, I'm a few days late, but nonetheless, blessed feast, Eid Mubarak. Oh, and by the way, that opening verb, Yad'una, invites us, that's from the same root as the word dawah. So we might say that the Feast of the Holy Trinity is engaging in a bit of dawah. It's inviting us. Whatever the case, I'd like to present a biblical argument for the Trinity. Now, there's lots of people out there that say, show me the Trinity in the Bible. And then you have certain people who have their favorite verses to try to show that. And I'm not knocking anyone's argument, but I'd like to take an approach that might be considered a bit different from what is typically seen out there. So I'd like to begin by presenting 4 points from the Bible. And the first point is the Father participated in creation. And you can find that in 1 Corinthians 8:6. Point 2, the Son participated in creation. And you can find that alluded to in John 1:3, Colossians 1:16, and Hebrews 1:10, among other verses. Then the third point I would introduce is the Holy Spirit participated in creation. And in support of that, I would cite Job 33:4 and Psalm 104:30, among other verses. And the fourth and final point might seem a bit different, and that's that God acts alone in creation. And a verse in favor of that point would be, for example, Isaiah 44:24. Now, putting those 4 points together, I would sum them up as follows. According to the Bible, 3 distinct persons participate in creation, and yet God acts alone in creation. At first glance, that might seem like a contradiction. 3 distinct persons participate in creation, yet God acts alone in creation. Maybe it's not a formal contradiction, but it might at least seem initially difficult to reconcile. How might we reconcile that? And with that in mind, I would say that the best reconciliation of those disparate points is the one provided by the doctrine of the Trinity, which posits that the one God, in some sense, perhaps mysterious sense, comprises or encompasses those 3 persons. And that's my very short argument in favor of the Trinity from the Bible. The Bible teaches that 3 distinct persons participate in creation, and the Bible also teaches that God acts alone in creation, and the doctrine of the Trinity is the best reconciliation of those 2 points. The one God comprises those 3 persons, or the one God is within those 3 persons. But in addition to that, I'd like to add something else, and that is that this also provides the best interpretive scope for making sense of the transition in Genesis 1:26 and 27, where God says, let us make man, as if plural, in verse 26, yet then creates in the singular, as if alone, in verse 27. Now, I know the plural construction in Genesis 1:26, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man, is a point of controversy, and I'm aware that many, many modern minds out there will assert that that's obviously just a royal plural. That's just a plural of majesty. However, as much as they try to pretend like that's obvious, especially obvious to anyone who knows Semitic languages, the reality is that it's pure speculation. The reality is that alleged royal plural wasn't at all obvious to a number of non-Christian writers who were quite familiar with the Hebrew text. For example, this is from Philo, or as people like to say, Philo, from his work, the Opificio Mundi, popularly known on the account of the world's creation given by Moses. And commenting on Genesis 1:26, he writes, quote, it is only in the instance of man's creation that we are told by Moses that God said, let us make, an expression which plainly shows the taking with him of others as fellow workers, end quote. Now, Philo goes on to argue that while God created other things alone, he created man with the help of others because he wanted those other agents to engage in the creation of man's less salubrious qualities. Now, you don't have to agree with Philo, but the point is we have a first century non-Christian Jewish commentator on Genesis, and he's treating the plural as literal in Genesis 1:26. And now I'd like to look at some other Jewish commentators from antiquity and from the Middle Ages, throughout different centuries. So here I have a copy of Miqra'ot Gedolot to Genesis. I've, worked with this text in previous videos, and I'm going to turn to the commentary on Genesis 1:26. So we'll start here. Now, on a typical page, you have the biblical text, then you have a couple of Aramaic translations, and then there's a number of commentaries, like from Rashi, from Ibn Ezra, from Nachmanides, etc. So where I'll begin is down here at the bottom, where it says Likutei Bavli, Yerushalmi. So these are comments from the two Talmuds. And what it comments here from Sanhedrin 38a, what it says is that with regards to God, he was speaking to Malakecha Sharet, the angels of the service, so the ministering angels. And Amar Lahem, he said to them, Retzonchem naaseh Adam, do you wish that we should create man? So from this Talmudic view, this ancient view, and I would date the Talmudic view to roughly, say, 4th century, the plural was literal in the sense that God was speaking to the angels. And now I'm going to turn the page, and I'm going to go to Targum Pseudo Yonatan. It says Targum Yonatan, we'll say Pseudo Jonathan. And I would date this translation to roughly after the rise of Islam, so we'll say roughly the 8th century. And the way it, does its translation mixed with commentary is typical of this Targum. What it does for Genesis 1:26 is it says, Amarya la malakaya, right? God said to the angels, Ma'abid Adam, we shall create man. So, but anyway, the important thing is that this text too has God talking to the angels. So the Talmud and Targum Pseudo Yonatan both take this view that the plural was literal. And now we can jump to Rashi, who lived in the 11th century. And you can see his commentary starting for Genesis 1:26. And he says, starts right here, for Naaseh Adam, he says, Anwetanuto shel Hakadosh Baruch Hu lamadnu mikan. The humbleness, the humility of the Holy One, blessed be He, we have learned from this, from here, right? And then he goes on to talk about Hamalakim, the angels, and he says Nimlach Bahem, that God consulted with them, with the angels. So this is a third source, and this is one of the most respected sources within Rabbinic Judaism. I'm not considering it all authoritative, but nonetheless, we see a very serious Jewish commentator, yet again taking the position that the plural is literal because God was consulting with the angels. Now, Rashi goes on to say that they didn't actually take part in the creation, but the point is the plural is treated as literal. And now we can go down to Ibn Ezra. And Ibn Ezra is interesting because this is the first source where you see a reference to a royal plural, as far as I know of anyway. He talks about, he says, Vayomer HaGaon. So he's talking about Sa'adia Gaon, who lived a century or two prior, and he's talking about his interpretation. And it continues on to the next page. And so when he gets into the interpretation of the verb na'aseh, let us make, it says, Amar bemilat na'aseh. He says, Sa'adia said with regards to the word na'aseh, We'im hi lashon rabim shechen min chag halmalachim ledaber, right? Which means that, if this is a plural, then it's because this was the custom of kings, the customs of the way that the kings speak. It's, so that's Sa'adia Gaon saying that it was something akin to a royal plural, that this is the way royalty speaks. And then Ibn Ezra proceeds to disagree with that view. He goes over some of the alleged evidence in favor of it and disagrees with it. And then he says, bear with me here, just try to focus. He says, Ata Afarish, he says, like, now I'm going to interpret it. And he says, let me see if I can jump straight to the point. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, here it is. He says, Amar Hashem, and God said, Lemalachim, to the angels, Na'aseh Adam. So again, Ibn Ezra, the one person who's aware of this view that it might be a royal plural, he himself disagrees and says, no, God was speaking to the angels. So again, the plural is literal. And then we can jump to, if I can turn back, to Nachmanides. Nachmanides takes the view that, again, it's literal, somewhat literal. And he says here, where is it? He says, so this is referring to God. He says, Amar be Adam, He said with regards to Adam, na'aseh, kilomar, as if to say, ani v'ha'aretz, I and the land, na'aseh Adam. So he was saying that while preceding things were created without the aid of anything else, he was working in conjunction with the land to create Adam, and that's why he said na'aseh Adam. But now you don't have to agree with any of these views, but the point is that here too, Nachmanides is saying that, in a sense, that he's treating the plural as literal. And so we saw a spectrum of Jewish views from antiquity and the Middle Ages. We had Philo in the 1st century, the Babylonian Talmud in roughly the 4th century, I would guess, Targum Pseudo Yonatan from roughly the 8th century, Rashi in the 11th century, Ibn Ezra in the 12th century, Nachmanides in the 13th century. And all these different Jewish thinkers, for none of them was it obvious that the plural was some sort of plural of majesty or royal plural. And therefore, you don't have to listen to people when they insist that a royal plural is just obvious to anyone who knows the language. However, I'm not going to say that you have to agree with these different Jewish thinkers. All of them were speculating as well. Instead, I would say that the Bible having God say, let us make, as if plural, and then having God create in the singular, as if alone, can best be understood against the biblical witness that 3 persons participate in creation, yet God acts alone in creation. Or we could note this in a slightly different way. For example, we could point out that Genesis 1:2 has the Spirit of God present at the beginning of creation. And then from there, we can note that Job 33:4 alludes to the Spirit of God participating in the creation of man. And then with those 2 points, we can state that that is the best context for understanding the phrase, let us make man, in Genesis 1:26. And then we could, of course, get to the various verses which we mentioned before, which have the Son also participating in creation. Whatever the case, the point is that when you contemplate some of the quote-unquote mechanics of creation, you see this process where God acts alone in creation and yet multiple persons participate in creation. And that, I think, is a profound bit of evidence in favor of a multi-personal conception of God. On that note, I'll close here, looking forward to the comments of others as always, and I'll close, as always, by saying, God bless.